All right, next up, I had a sheet here. Let me see if I can find it. One second. I do this because I want to do I like to do a little cross promotion for our storytellers. So next up we have Dr. Dave Jetmore, some of you know. And you know he's made his career primarily as a doctor, but what you don't know is that on Thursday, October 17th, he's going to be here as part of the 50 Shades of Magic Mike show as a dancer. So if you'd like to see a side of Dr. David Jetmore that you haven't seen before, this is a little cross promotion for a very talented man. So Dr. Dave Jetmore is a local doc, a great storyteller, and he told the very first story ever for Warp Woof nearly a year ago, and he's back. He's back for more. So please welcome to the stage, come see him for this, Dr. Dave Jetmore.
Okay. After I finished my surgical internship, but before I began my residency and training for ENT, I spent 2 years as a family doctor in the Ozark Mountains in northern Arkansas. I was married with 2 little kids, Matt and Kate, and I lived in a little town called Jasper. We had a clinic with, I think, 1 exam room, a little cubbyhole of a waiting room. I had a nurse who worked for me. Her name was Holly. She was a great nurse, and she had a husband named Rufus. And Rufus didn't have a job. I mean, he didn't have a job where he got a paycheck, but he was one of those guys that was always trading things, and they were always these bizarre trades. You never could figure out who benefited from it. It would be a couple coon dog puppies for some rusted fencing tools, or it would be 30 rods of barbed wire for a lame pony, or a duck for a goose. I never knew where it was gone. At any rate, one evening, we'd finished seeing patients. I'd locked up the office, and we were walking to the parking lot. Rufus had come to pick up Holly. He was about 10 years older than she was and had kind of a raspy voice, but he comes up to me and he says, hey, Dr. Jetmore. I said, yeah. He said, hey, I got a pretty good deal for you. I said, well, what is the deal? He said, well, he'd bought a pig for $2 at an animal auction down in Beebe, Arkansas, and he got a really good deal on it because the pig was ruptured. And he had the idea that if I fixed that rupture, he could feed out that pig and he'd give me half the meat. Well, I could think just off the top of my head of 11 reasons why I didn't want to get involved with this. One of them is I can afford a ham sandwich. I'm not a veterinarian. I don't know where I'd put half of a side of hog. I mean, they got that little freezer atop the refrigerator. But then, when you look back on misadventure, you think, how did I get there? I mean, where was the turn that made me? So I started having these other thoughts, like, I've been working really hard. I've been away from my kids. This would be a chance for me and my little son, Matt, to do something together. He was only 5. And I'd seen pig ruptures repaired. I mean, I grew up on a farm. There wasn't a lot to it. Somebody held the pig by the hind legs. You removed the testicles, poked the intestines back in that hole, sewed them up, game, set, match. And then there's a part of me, and sometimes I wish I didn't have that part, but it's It's that feeling a little boy has with a rock in his hand staring at a plate glass window. He knows what he shouldn't do, but he wants to know deep in his heart what would happen. So I thought, well, this will be an adventure. So I told Holly, I had her sterilize all the surgical instruments that I would need. She put together some sterile gloves, some xylocaine, a syringe, and some suture material. And that Saturday, I got Matt in the car, turned on the air conditioning because it was in August in Arkansas, which is the heat almost makes you lose your will to live. And we set out for Rufus and Holly's farm. And the day was so hot you could see the heat shimmer on the highway. And you'd see those little water mirages that you'd come up on, and then the water would disappear. And all the pastures had died. It hadn't rained for 6 weeks. It was hot. So we came to their farm, and there was a narrow gravel driveway that went up a gentle slope to their house. And there they were. They had their 2 kids out there, Jack and Molly. And they were all out in the front yard waiting for the doctor. And there were a couple banty chickens scratching around in the dirt, a goose wandering around, and probably the same goose that Rufus had traded for. And I said, Rufus, where's the pig? He said, he's out in the barn. Well, I look out there, and there's this rickety, unpainted barn with this dilapidated, rusted tin roof. And then next to that is this ramshackle corn crib with intermittent concrete block foundation. Quite the operative suite. But he opened the gate for us, and all of us trooped down to this barn. And he said, you ought to put that cigarette out, Doc. And I thought, he's right. If fire ever touched that barn, it would be like a cigarette lighter to tissue paper. I mean, it would go up. So I got rid of my cigarette. We go into the barn, and I set up a bale of straw. I put some sterile drapes on it to hold my surgical instruments. Put on my rubber gloves, and then I see the pig. Now, in my mind's eye, this was going to be an 8-pound pig with an inguinal hernia. Well, this was a 30-pound pig with an umbilical hernia, a belly button hernia. I didn't have an anesthesiologist with me, so Jack and Rufus each grabbed a hind leg, and then Holly and Molly each grabbed a front leg. I washed that area. And as soon as we turned that pig on his back, he started screaming, and it was deafening. Every exhalation was a squall, a high-pitched squall. But I numbed up the skin over that hernia. I made this incision, and as would be expected, there's all this intestine. So I poke all this intestine back into the abdominal wall, and I get ready to throw a suture into that. And this pig would squeal, and all those intestines would bubble up again. I'd poke them all down again. I'd get ready to throw that suture. That pig would squeal, and plop, 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 up would come these intestines. And then I noticed, I was having a hard time seeing. I mean, my eyes were burning. Am I getting sweat in my eyes? I mean, I was sweating, like a pig. But I looked up from the wound, and I noticed the whole barn is filled with smoke. Well, when I'd thrown my cigarette away, it had set the pasture on fire. And there was a gentle breeze carrying it down the hill toward that barn. So here I am in a barn with my little boy, a disemboweled pig, and a prairie fire heading for me. So I didn't want to leave this pig. I couldn't leave my patient. And so Holly said, I'll hold both the front legs. Rufus, you hold the back legs. And then they sent those two kids off to get at the garden hose. He said, there's two garden hoses. You hook them together, run that out into the pasture, and put that fire out. So off they went. And in the meantime, I'm poking these intestines back in this hole and trying to close it. Then, and never get a single suture in. And then these kids come back and they say the hose isn't far enough. They can squirt water out there, but they can't get it to the fire. She said there's a third section, but only she knew where it was. So the three of them go to get this hose to put out the fire and save our collective lives. And I straddle this pig. I throw a leg over him and kind of squeeze his chest between my thighs, and Rufus is still holding the hind legs. And finally, that pig, I catch him in mid-squeal, and I get this suture in one side, out the other, and it's a perfect suture. I lay that knot down, another overhand, another overhand, another overhand. It's a perfect knot. And then I'm able to get 4 more in a row. They're good, heavy silk sutures. I trim them off. I trim the skin. I put some skin sutures in. It looks perfect. In fact, Rufus later told me when we let that pig up and he ran out of the barn that he crawled under that corn crib, and when he crawled out 3 days later, he was as good as new. But I was kind of shaken by this near-death experience. I was hoping for something a little more triumphant for my son to witness. I gathered my instruments together, and the two of us trudged up this charred hillside, our footsteps making little billows of ash as we walked. And my son said, "Dad, what caused that fire?" Well, no one wants to look like the idiot he is to a 5-year-old child. So I said, "Matty, lightning hit that field." And he said, "There wasn't any rain." I said, "Son, that was heat lightning." And he said, "How come we didn't hear any thunder?" And I said, "Matty, you couldn't hear anything over that pig squealing." I had survived it, and quite honestly, I wanted to forget the whole experience that ever happened. But we would always pass that farm on our way down the highway to Harrison, Arkansas, to get groceries once a week. And invariably, that child would look out the window and say, "Look, Mommy, that's where lightning struck the Ruptured Pig pasture." Thank you.